The last place I ever expected to fall apart was a doctor's office. Think about it, you walk in expecting them to check your blood pressure, hand you some vitamins, tell you to drink more water, the usual. You don't walk into a routine checkup expecting your entire life to be rewritten in 45 minutes. But that's exactly what happened to me. My name is Daniel Reyes, I'm 29 years old, and the day I sat in that cold examination room staring at white ceiling tiles under buzzing fluorescent lights, I had absolutely no idea that the doctor was about to tell me something that would crack my chest wide open, and through that crack somehow, let in the most beautiful, terrifying, unexpected love I have ever known in my life. I need to tell you this story, all of it. Even the parts that still make me catch my breath at 2 in the morning when the house is quiet and the memories come rushing back like a tide I can't hold. Because maybe, just maybe, you need to hear it too. So please stay with me. It was a Tuesday in late October, the kind of October day where the sky can't decide if it wants to rain or not, so it just hangs there, gray and heavy and noncommittal over the city. I remember that detail so clearly because I sat in my car in the parking lot of Riverside Medical Clinic for 11 full minutes before I could make myself go inside. I almost didn't go at all. For about 2 months leading up to that day, I had been feeling off, nothing dramatic, nothing that would make you call an ambulance or even mention it at dinner. Just this low, persistent tiredness that lived in my bones, the kind that sleep doesn't fix, that coffee only temporarily masks. My appetite had quietly dropped. I was getting these strange, dull headaches in the evenings that I kept blamming on too much screen time. And occasionally, not often, but occasionally, my heart would do this little flutter deep in my chest. Not painful, just noticeable. Like someone briefly pressed a single finger against the inside of my ribs, a gentle, eerie tap, and then was gone. I grew up in a household where you didn't go to the doctor unless you were bleeding or couldn't stand. My father, a proud and quiet man from Guadalajara, believed that most things healed themselves if you were simply tough enough to wait them out. We went to church more than we went to any clinic. I had absorbed that worldview far more deeply than I ever realized, the way children absorb everything, silently, completely, permanently. So when my best friend Marcus called me on a Saturday afternoon, took one look at my face through the phone screen and said, "Daniel, you look gray. I don't mean you look tired, I mean you literally look like someone replaced you with a gray version of yourself. Go to a doctor," I laughed. I told him he was being dramatic. I told him I was fine. Marcus had known me for 8 years. He had seen me through a bad breakup, through losing my job at 25, through every low and every high. He was not a dramatic man, he was the most grounded person I knew. He looked at me through that screen and said quietly, without any drama at all, "Daniel, please just go." So I went. I booked the earliest appointment I could get, which was 3 weeks out. And on that gray Tuesday in October, I sat in my car for 11 minutes, talking myself into walking through those doors. The clinic smelled like every clinic smells: antiseptic, recycled air, and something faintly like old coffee. The waiting room had 7 people in it and a TV in the corner playing a cooking show on mute. I filled out my forms, sat in a chair near the window, and watched the gray sky outside and thought about absolutely nothing. They called my name after 20 minutes. The nurse who took my vitals was a small woman named Rosa who had clearly been doing this for decades and wore the calm, efficient energy of someone who has seen everything. She wrapped the blood pressure cuff around my arm, pumped it up, watched the numbers, and wrote something down without expression. She took my temperature. She noted my weight. She asked me about my symptoms in the practiced way of someone building a file, not having a conversation. Then she said, "The doctor will be right with you," and left me alone in the examination room. The examination room was small and very cold and smelled like latex gloves. There was a poster on the wall about hand washing. The paper on the examination table crinkled every time I shifted my weight. I sat there for another 10 minutes alone with the fluorescent hum of the lights, and I thought about how much I hated this, and how I should have brought my headphones, and whether I'd be out in time to make it back to work for the 2 o'clock meeting. Then the door opened, and Dr. Elliot Marsh walked in. I want to be very honest with you right now, because this story deserves honesty. When Dr. Elliot Marsh walked into that examination room, my first thought was not, "This man is about to change my life." My first thought, and I say this with full awareness of how absurd it sounds in retrospect, was that he looked too young to be a doctor. He was tall, maybe 6'1", 6'2". He had dark brown hair that was slightly overgrown, like he'd been meaning to get a haircut and kept not getting around to it. He was wearing dark blue scrubs and a white coat over them, and he had glasses, thin-framed, slightly round, the kind that look effortlessly good on exactly the kind of person who doesn't think about how they look. He was maybe 32, 33. There was a small scar above his left eyebrow, barely visible like a comma. And he had the most genuinely kind eyes I had ever seen on a stranger. Not the professional warmth kind, not the customer service smile that lives only in the mouth. His eyes, dark gray, attentive, real, carried the kind of steadiness that makes you feel inexplicably that everything is going to be handled. "Mr. Reyes," he said, extending his hand. His voice was calm and even unhurried. "I'm Dr. Marsh, it's good to meet you, sorry for the wait." He actually meant that last part, you could tell. "It's fine," I said, I wasn't in a hurry. He sat on the rolling stool across from me, opened my chart on his laptop, and asked me to walk him through what I'd been experiencing. So I did. I told him about the fatigue, the headaches, the appetite change, the occasional flutter in my chest. I tried to sound casual about it, the way men do when they're describing symptoms they're secretly worried about, minimizing the edges, softening the timeline, making it sound like a mild inconvenience rather than 2 months of something feeling wrong. He listened, he didn't type while I talked, he looked at me, he nodded occasionally. When I finished, he asked 4 or 5 follow-up questions, specific, precise, the kind that told me he'd actually processed everything I said rather than waiting for his turn to speak. He asked whether the fatigue was worse in the mornings or evenings. He asked whether the heart flutter happened at rest or during activity. He asked whether I'd had any swelling in my legs or ankles. Then he stood up, snapped on gloves, and did a thorough physical examination. When he pressed his stethoscope to my chest and listened, really listened, moving it to 3 different positions, asking me to breathe deeply, then to hold, his expression stayed neutral. But something in his posture shifted. A microscopic thing, just the slightest increase in attention. I noticed it. "I'm going to recommend we run some blood work and an EKG today," he said, pulling the stethoscope away. He sat back down, made some notes. "Your blood pressure is a little elevated. Your resting heart rate is also higher than I'd like. The symptoms you're describing, the fatigue, the palpitations, the headaches, could be a number of things, most of them completely manageable, but I want to rule some things out." "Rule what out?" I asked. He looked at me with those steady gray eyes. "Let's see what the tests tell us first," he said. "I don't want to speculate before we have data, but I want you to know you were absolutely right to come in. These symptoms deserve attention." Something about the way he said that, "you were absolutely right to come in," hit me unexpectedly. Because I had spent weeks telling myself I was being soft, that I was overreacting, that I should just push through. And here was this calm, competent stranger with kind eyes telling me no, that I'd done the right thing. It sounds small, it wasn't. They drew blood, they did the EKG. I waited again in that paper-crinkling room, scrolling absently through my phone, not reading anything, just letting my eyes move over words without absorbing them. Dr. Marsh came back 20 minutes later. He sat down. He looked at me. And then he said the sentence that split my life into a before and an after. "Daniel," he said, and it was the first time he'd used my first name, "the EKG has shown something I want to talk to you about." I put my phone in my pocket. "Your heart has what's called an arrhythmia," he said. "Specifically, we're seeing a pattern consistent with Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome. It's a condition where there's an extra electrical pathway in the heart that can cause episodes of rapid heartbeat. The fluttering you've been feeling, that's real, that's your heart experiencing irregular electrical signals." I stared at him. "Is it?" I started, stopped, started again. "Is it serious?" "It can be if left unmanaged," he said calmly and honestly. "But the good news, and there is significant good news here, is that this is a very well understood condition. We have excellent treatment options. Most people with WPW live completely normal lives, but we caught this because you came in, and I'm glad you did." He kept talking. He explained what would happen next: a referral to a cardiologist, more tests, possibly a procedure called ablation that could eliminate the extra pathway entirely. He used clear language. He checked in with me. He did not rush. But I have to tell you honestly what was happening inside me while he spoke. I was terrified. Not the dramatic, movie terror of gasping and gripping the table. The quiet, awful terror of suddenly understanding that your body has been doing something wrong without your knowledge. That the thing you live inside, the engine you trust without thinking, has a flaw. That you have been walking around for weeks, months, with something in you that needed fixing and you almost didn't come. You almost just kept pushing through. What if Marcus hadn't called? What if I had canceled? I realized, sitting on that crinkly paper with fluorescent light washing everything pale, that I was about 30 seconds from crying in a doctor's office, which was something I had not done since I was 8 years old. "Mr. Reyes," Dr. Marsh's voice was quiet. "Daniel, are you okay?" I pressed my lips together, breathed. Yeah, I said, I wasn't expecting that. I know, he said, and then he did something that I have thought about many times since. He closed his laptop. He put it aside entirely. He leaned forward slightly on that rolling stool, elbows resting loosely on his knees, and he just stayed there, present, unhurried, not filling the silence with reassurances or clipboard procedures, just there. This is a lot to hear, he said simply. Yeah, I said, my voice was embarrassingly unsteady. It's okay that it's a lot. I looked at the hand-washing poster on the wall for a moment. I counted the steps in the illustration. I got to 6 before I trusted my voice again. I almost didn't come today, I told him. I sat in the parking lot for like 10 minutes trying to talk myself into walking in. He nodded slowly. I'm glad you walked in, he said. There was nothing clinical about the way he said it. It was just true, a person meaning a thing they were saying. I don't know exactly what happened in that moment, only that something shifted. Some wall I didn't know I'd been carrying leaned slightly off its foundation. Thank you, I said, for I don't know being straight with me. He smiled, just briefly, and I noticed for the first time, absurdly, inappropriately, given the conversation we were having about my heart, that his smile changed the entire landscape of his face. The gravity lifted for just a second and there was something almost boyish in it, something unguarded. That's the only way I know how to do this job, he said. He gave me a printed summary of the findings, referral paperwork, and instructions for the next steps. He shook my hand again at the door. I walked out into the gray October afternoon, sat in my car, and called Marcus. When he picked up, I said, "You were right, I should have gone sooner." A pause, then Marcus in the gentlest voice, "But you went, Daniel, that's what matters." I drove home. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, and I thought about the doctor with the kind gray eyes who closed his laptop when I was scared, and I thought, I'm probably never going to see that man again after this is all over. I was wrong about that. The cardiology referral appointment was 2 weeks later, at a larger hospital across town. I sat in the cardiology waiting room, which was considerably more intimidating than the general clinic, more equipment visible, more serious-looking people. A large screen on the wall cycling through diagrams of the human heart like an art gallery of the organ I was apparently betraying me. I had done what every person told not to Google their symptoms immediately does. I had Googled my symptoms immediately. I had spent the 2 weeks between appointments reading medical papers I only half understood, forum posts from people with WPW, and watching YouTube videos where cardiologists drew diagrams on whiteboards. I had arrived at my cardiology appointment with the specific, dangerous confidence of someone who has read just enough to be frightened, but not enough to be informed. The cardiologist was a brisk, efficient woman named Dr. Acaffer who confirmed everything Dr. Marsh had found, ordered an echocardiogram and a Holter monitor study, and told me I was a good candidate for the ablation procedure. She was excellent at her job. She was also very busy, and our appointment had the efficient, focused energy of someone managing a large patient load with precision. When I left that appointment, I had more information, a clearer path forward, and the mild, persistent loneliness of having processed something large and scary largely by myself. Marcus tried. He called every other day. My mother, when I told her, immediately started sending me articles about herbal heart remedies and prayer, which was love expressed in the language she had available. I appreciated it. I also sat alone in my apartment most evenings looking at the wall. It was in this period that I did something I still find difficult to explain. I called Riverside Medical Clinic and asked to schedule a follow-up with Dr. Marsh. It wasn't necessary, strictly speaking. I was under the cardiologist's care now. Dr. Marsh had done his job, the baton had been passed, but I told myself I just wanted to keep him informed, that it was good medical practice to loop back to the referring physician, that there was nothing strange about it. I was lying to myself, people are very good at that. He walked into the examination room and I felt my chest do the flutter thing, and for once, I knew it had nothing to do with the arrhythmia. "Daniel," he said, and that small warmth in his voice when he said my name was absolutely maddening. "How are you doing? How was the cardiology appointment?" We talked through everything. He had already received Dr. Acaffer's notes, but he asked me to tell him about it in my own words, and he listened the same way he had before, genuinely, fully, without the laptop. I told him about the upcoming Holter monitor. I told him about the ablation possibility. I told him I'd been scared and had read too many things online and had worked myself into a minor panic at 1 a.m. 2 Tuesdays ago reading a Reddit thread. He laughed at that, a real quiet laugh. The Reddit thread was a mistake, he said. Massive mistake, I agreed. Those forums select heavily for the outlier cases, he said. The people whose procedures went perfectly and who are living their lives normally don't generally feel compelled to post about it. That's exactly what I needed someone to tell me 2 weeks ago. He smiled again, and again I noticed how much it changed him. In repose, he had a natural gravity to him, careful, contained, focused. The smile broke that opened briefly like light through a cloud gap. We talked for longer than was medically necessary. At some point the conversation drifted naturally and without my quite noticing away from my chart. He asked how long I'd lived in the city. I asked how long he'd been practicing. He mentioned he'd done his residency in Boston, that he'd moved here 4 years ago for reasons he described briefly as a life reorganization. I didn't press. He asked what I did for work. I told him I was a graphic designer, that I worked mostly in brand identity. He said that was interesting, that he'd always been fascinated by how visual language worked, how colors and shapes communicated meaning below the level of conscious thought. I looked at him. Most people say, oh, logos and stuff when I tell them that. Most people are incurious, he said simply. I think that was the exact moment I was in trouble and knew it. When I got up to leave, he held out his hand to shake as before. But this time when I took it, he held on one beat longer than a handshake requires. It was nothing. It was the smallest thing. It was the kind of thing you could talk yourself out of having noticed. I did not talk myself out of having noticed. I went home, I sat on my couch. I said out loud to my empty apartment, Daniel, he is your doctor, get it together. My apartment did not respond. I got not even slightly together. The Holter monitor was a small device I wore strapped to my chest for 48 hours, with electrodes attached at 5 points on my skin, recording every electrical signal my heart produced. I had to carry a little diary and note any symptoms, any activities, any moments of elevated stress. The diary had entries like 10:32 a.m. palpitation mild, was walking upstairs at work. 2:15 p.m. palpitation brief, was thinking about. I did not complete that entry. I returned the monitor. I waited for results. I went back to Riverside for a third follow-up, which was by this point genuinely not medically required, and I knew it, and I went anyway. This time, when I walked in, Rosa the nurse gave me a look that was so small and so knowing that I nearly turned around and left the building. She said nothing. She took my blood pressure. She noted it was slightly elevated from the previous visit, just slightly, and she said with the world-weary composure of someone who has seen everything, the doctor will be right with you. When Dr. Marsh came in, he looked at me and said, I want to be honest with you about something. My heart lurched. I looked at your file this morning, he said, and medically you're doing well. The cardiologist has everything she needs. The Holter results will go directly to her. You're in good hands. He paused. So I want to ask you, and you don't have to answer, but why did you come back today? The room was very quiet. The fluorescent lights hummed. I had about 4 different versions of a lie ready. I had a question about my medications. I wasn't sure about the pre-procedure instructions. I was in the neighborhood. What I said instead, because apparently I had decided to do that, was, I don't fully know. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I want to tell you something, and I need you to understand that I'm aware this is professionally complicated. I waited. I've been looking forward to your appointments, he said, in a way that I recognize isn't standard. He looked at me steadily, those gray eyes serious and open. I don't have a polished speech prepared for this. I've actually been trying not to notice it for about 3 weeks. The paper on the examination table crinkled when I shifted. I was aware of every small sound in the room. You're my patient, he said. That matters to me. I would never want to make you uncomfortable or put you in a position where you felt. Elliot, I said. I used his first name without planning to. It surprised both of us. He stopped. I've made 3 appointments I didn't medically need, I said. I think we both know what that means. The longest 3 seconds of my life followed. Then quietly, yeah, he said, I think we do. Here is where I need to be very honest with you about something important. Because this story is real, or as real as stories about the heart ever are, and real stories have ethics in them, not just feelings. Dr. Marsh Elliott was professional and careful in a way that I deeply respected. After that moment in the examination room, he did something that told me everything I needed to know about the kind of person he was. He said, "I can't be your doctor anymore, not given this. It wouldn't be right. I want to refer you to another physician at this practice before anything else happens." I nodded. "I know," I said. "I mean it," he said. "This isn't a situation where I can have it both ways." "I know," I said again. "I agree with you." He referred me to Dr. Patel, a warm and excellent physician at the same clinic, who took over my general care seamlessly and who I remain with to this day. The transfer of care was handled with complete professionalism and total transparency. And then, only then, with the appropriate line clearly drawn, Elliot Marsh asked me if I would like to get coffee sometime, as two people with no professional relationship between them. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We met on a Saturday morning at a small coffee shop called The Lantern, 6 blocks from the clinic, that had mismatched wooden chairs and a window full of rain. It was early November by then, the city fully committed to the gray and cold it had only been hinting at in October. I got there first. I sat at a table by the window and watched the rain and felt more nervous than I had in years, which was absurd. I had navigated a medical diagnosis, the prospect of a cardiac procedure, and the complete reorganization of how I understood my own health, and I was nervous about coffee. But fear of the heart, I was learning, takes many forms. He walked in at exactly the time we'd agreed, which I noticed because it's the kind of thing you notice about people you're paying close attention to. He was wearing a dark green jacket and had his hands shoved in the pockets, and his hair was doing the slightly overgrown thing again, and something in my chest did a flutter that I was completely certain was not the arrhythmia. He spotted me. He smiled, that full face-changing smile. He sat down across from me and said, "I've never been this nervous about coffee in my life." I laughed, an actual surprised laugh. I was literally just thinking that. He exhaled. "Okay, good, we're on the same page." We ordered coffee. We talked. We talked for 4 hours. I learned that he had grown up in a small town in Oregon, the middle of 3 brothers, in a house where feelings were handled in the same way my father had handled illness, with silence and toughness and the expectation that you would figure it out alone. I learned that he had come out to his family at 26, during his second year of residency, in a conversation that he described as the bravest and most terrifying thing I had ever done, and also somehow anticlimactic, because my mother had apparently already known for years. I learned that the life reorganization that had brought him to this city 4 years ago was the end of a long relationship, not dramatic, he said, not catastrophic, just two people who had grown in different directions and had the painful maturity to acknowledge it. I told him about my own coming out, which had happened at 22 and had been messier, louder, more complicated with family and culture, and the particular weight of being a Mexican-American gay man navigating spaces that didn't always know what to do with all of what I was simultaneously. I told him about the relationship I'd had at 25 that had lasted 2 years and ended when my partner moved across the country for a career opportunity, and we had both known, even as we talked about long distance, that we weren't going to be each other's future. I told him about Marcus. He laughed genuinely when I described Marcus, saying I looked like a gray crayon. "He sounds like a good friend," Elliot said. "He's the reason I walked into that clinic," I said. He looked at me across the table in the window light with the rain soft against the glass behind him. "I'm glad he convinced you," he said quietly. There was something in that, the echo of what he'd said in the examination room, "I'm glad you walked in," that made my throat tight in a way I couldn't fully explain. "Me too," I said. When we finally stepped out of the Lantern into the wet November afternoon, we stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the particular awkwardness of an ending that neither person wants to be an ending. "Can I see you again?" he asked, straightforward, no games. "Yes," I said, "same." He smiled, he put up his collar against the rain, he started walking and then stopped and turned back. "For what it's worth," he said, "I haven't looked forward to something in a long time, the way I've been looking forward to today." I watched him walk away down the wet sidewalk in his dark green jacket until he turned the corner. Then I called Marcus. "How was it?" Marcus said immediately. "I think I might be in real trouble," I said. A pause, "The heart kind or the arrhythmia kind?" "The heart kind," I said. "Good," said Marcus, "it's about time." We saw each other the following weekend, and the one after that. We took long walks in the late autumn cold, talking about everything and nothing, about music, about childhood, about what we believed about the world and why, about the specific texture of loneliness and what it does to a person over time. I noticed things about him that I catalogued privately, helplessly, the way you do when you're falling for someone and trying not to admit it too fast. That he always held the door for the person behind him, that he made real eye contact when he was listening, that he had a quiet, dry humor that appeared so rarely it felt like a gift when it did. That he sometimes went briefly somewhere else in the middle of a conversation, not rudely, just visibly carrying a thought, and then came back and apologized for it, and you could tell he'd actually been thinking about what you'd said. That he was lonely too. He didn't say it directly, but loneliness has a language that you learn to read when you've spoken it yourself. One evening in late November, we were sitting on a bench in Riverside Park, named after the same street as the clinic, which I found quietly funny, and the city was lit and cold and the last of the leaves were down, and I said something that surprised me as I was saying it. "I'm scared," I said. He looked at me. "Of the procedure?" "Of this," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "Me too," he said. "Tell me why," I said. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, looking out at the dark river. "Because I've had the experience of investing fully in something and losing it," he said. "And I don't say that to be dramatic or to put that on you. I say it because I think I've been careful for a long time, managed, safe." He paused. "And I don't feel safe right now. I feel like things could really matter again, and that's a lot." I looked at the side of his face, the scar above his eyebrow, the slight overgrowth of his hair, the steadiness he carried like a coat. "Yeah," I said, "that's exactly it." We sat in the cold for a while longer, not saying much, the city moving around us. Then he reached over slowly and put his hand over mine where it rested on the bench between us. And we stayed like that in the cold and the light and the quietly enormous fragility of two people choosing to be scared together, and I really thought this is the thing, this is what I could not have predicted walking into that parking lot on a gray October Tuesday. This, right here. The procedure was scheduled for mid-January. By the time it arrived, Elliot and I had been seeing each other for 2.5 months. It was not yet defined, we hadn't had that conversation, but it was real. Unmistakably, quietly, beautifully real. He offered to come to the hospital. I told him he didn't have to. He said he wanted to. I said okay. The ablation itself was a same-day procedure done under sedation. Dr. Acaffer was precise and excellent. A catheter was guided to the extra-electrical pathway in my heart, and a burst of radiofrequency energy was used to eliminate it. The aberrant path, the thing that had been causing the flutter, the palpitations, the quiet misfires, was closed. I was awake and groggy in recovery when Elliot appeared in the doorway of my curtained bay, still in his jacket, clearly having been sitting in the waiting room for however many hours it had taken. "Hi," I said, my voice rough from the sedation. "Hi," he said. He sat in the chair beside the bed. He didn't make a big moment of it. He just sat there in the way he was very good at, present and steady and real and not filling space unnecessarily. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Weird," I said, "but okay." He nodded. "My heart feels," I searched for the word. "Quiet," I said, "like something stopped talking that was always talking." He looked at me with those gray eyes. "That's a good sign," he said. "Yeah," I said. I reached over and found his hand. He held on. Recovery took a few weeks. Marcus came over and watched terrible television with me and brought soup 3 separate times, which is the purest expression of love I have ever received. My mother called every day and I let her, because I understood now that her worry was not a burden, it was her heart, speaking in the language it had. Elliot came by twice during recovery. We ordered food and sat on my couch and he explained things about cardiac physiology that I found genuinely fascinating, and he found genuinely puzzling that I found fascinating. "You're weird," he said once, not unkindly. "You closed your laptop when I was scared," I said. "In the very first appointment, that's weird too." That's just how I work." I know, I said, that's the point. He looked at me for a moment, that gravity and then the slow shift into the smile. You notice things, he said. So do you, I said. In March, almost exactly 5 months after I sat in my car in a parking lot talking myself into walking through a clinic door, we had the conversation that named what we were. It was not a dramatic conversation. It was a very ordinary Sunday afternoon, and we were making coffee in my kitchen, and he said simply, I'd like for us to be together, officially, if you want that. I looked at him across my small kitchen. Yes, I said, I want that. He exhaled like he'd been holding that breath for 5 months. Okay, he said, and then quietly with that small, real smile, okay. Now I want to circle back. Because the title of this story is Doctor's Shocking Discovery During My Checkup, and technically the discovery was a cardiac arrhythmia, an extra electrical pathway in my heart, Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome. That was the medical discovery. But here is what I believe was actually found in that small, cold examination room on a gray Tuesday in October, under fluorescent lights, on paper that crinkles. A person who had been pushing through for too long. A person who had learned so thoroughly that vulnerability was weakness that he almost let something serious go unaddressed because asking for help felt soft. A person who sat in a parking lot for 11 minutes trying to decide if he was worth the trouble. And a doctor who closed his laptop when he saw that person was scared. Who said you were right to come in. Who made room in the middle of a busy clinic schedule for a person's fear to be real and valid and not rushed through. I don't think it's an accident that the place I found Elliot was the place I finally chose to take care of myself. I don't think it's an accident that the same appointment that revealed a flaw in my heart also led me toward the person who would come to know that heart more thoroughly than anyone. I believe that sometimes the bravest thing we do is the smallest thing, walking through a door we almost didn't walk through, picking up the phone when a friend says please just go, sitting on crinkly paper in a cold room and admitting that something needs attention. Your body knows things your stubbornness is trying to override. Your life knows things your fear is trying to manage. Listen. Epilogue now. It's been a year and a half since that October appointment. My heart is healthy, the arrhythmia is gone, corrected completely, closed at the source. Dr. Akhafer says my cardiac function is entirely normal. I go for routine checkups with Dr. Patel, who is excellent and has absolutely no idea she's seeing me, partly because her colleague and I needed a professional boundary drawn so we could fall in love properly, and I intend to keep it that way. Elliot still has the slightly overgrown hair. He still has the gravity and then the smile. He still makes real eye contact when you're talking. He still goes briefly somewhere else in the middle of a conversation and then comes back and apologizes, and I have stopped telling him he doesn't need to apologize because watching him do it is one of my favorite things. We went back to the Lantern last November, exactly a year after our first coffee, and sat at the same window table in the rain. He ordered what he'd ordered the first time. So did I, because I have a flair for the symbolic. What were you thinking, I asked him, when you walked in and saw me sitting there that first day? He considered this. I was thinking that I didn't know how this was going to go, he said, and I was thinking that I didn't care, that it was worth not knowing. I thought about the parking lot, the 11 minutes, the gray sky. Me too, I said. He reached across the table, the same way he'd reached across that park bench in November cold, and put his hand over mine. Outside, the city moved in the rain. Inside, everything was exactly the right kind of quiet. Speech balloon final words for you watching this. If you made it to the end of this story, I want to say something directly to you. Please go to the doctor. Not because something dramatic will happen. Probably nothing dramatic will happen. Probably they'll check your blood pressure, tell you to drink more water, send you home. But maybe they'll find something that needed finding. Maybe you'll catch something early that becomes simple instead of serious. Maybe you'll walk out with just a little more information about the body you live in, and that information will matter someday in a way you can't predict. And maybe, just maybe, the act of choosing to take care of yourself will open a door you didn't know was there. You are worth the appointment, you are worth the drive. You are worth the 11 minutes in the parking lot, talking yourself into going in. Go in. This story is a work of creative fiction inspired by real emotions and experiences, written for storytelling purposes. Medical decisions should always be made in consultation with qualified healthcare professionals. If you are experiencing heart symptoms, please seek medical attention. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop in the comments, have you ever had a moment that changed everything when you least expected it? I read every single one. See you in the next story, Blue Heart.